Okay, great. Yeah, so let's start, and I would like to start with Jess from Clean Air Task Force, if that's okay with you.
Of course, unless Richard has to go because he has kids in the car, which I understand. So if he wants to go first, I'm willing to let him go first.
Well,
It's totally up to you.
if that's amenable to you, that would be fantastic. But don't feel pressured.
Oh no, I totally get it. So if that's okay with you, Kaylee,
Of course,
I'll
yes.
let him go first. So
Yes, great. Thank you, Richard.
You're
The
welcome.
floor is yours.
Okay, well, thank you very much. That's hugely appreciated, because usually my colleague Louise would do a presentation like this. So it's great. Is someone's microphone feeding back? I don't know whose that is. Okay. I need to have a permission to share. And it says only meeting organizers and presenters can share, but I'm obviously not on that list. Brilliant. Okay. Excellent. Can you see my slides? Yep, and hear me clearly? Okay, well, thank you very much for approaching Project Seagrass and giving us the opportunity to pitch our ideas to you. So that's fantastic. Just in case those of you on this call don't know what seagrasses are, they're marine plants that cover large areas of the ocean. They live on the coasts of every continent except for Antarctica, and they've been under pressure all around the world. And their coverage has declined vastly. In the UK, that may be as much as 92%. And generally, a lot of that loss has been historic, although some of that loss continues in some parts today. And as an organization, we're very much trying to conserve what's left, and we want to bring back as much of that as possible. And there are many reasons for that. So we're trying to work as an organization to restore seagrass, and that's by using science, using an evidence-based approach, and working with collaborators all around the world, including many in the Netherlands, including many in Denmark and Germany and Australia, in Canada and in the US. So it's about using the best science to have the biggest impact. So this superhero that I'm referring to is seagrass, and the superhero has a huge role in our oceans. It creates this three-dimensional habitat that you can see, and in that animals live. Animals have a home that they can have a supply of food within. They can shelter, they can hide away, and many of those small animals are actually juvenile fish. So juvenile cod, juvenile plaice, juvenile bass. Many of the favorites that you guys will recognize in the Netherlands that are present in the North Sea spend their formative years in a seagrass meadow. And there's a huge biodiversity that's present in that seagrass. So if we compare a seagrass meadow against an area that's just covered in bare sand or mud, there's about 35 times the amount of animal life in that seagrass relative to that muddy, sandy area. But they're also doing incredible things in terms of our planetary boundaries. They're they're absorbing and trapping huge amounts of carbon for long periods of time in their sediments. They're cycling nutrients, and that means they're filtering the water. They're making our waters clearer, cleaner, more habitable, and basically full of life. So I think it's fair to call seagrass a superhero. When we actually translate some of those things into targets and goals at a planetary level, what we begin to understand is that seagrasses play a role in contributing to many of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Not every seagrass meadow contributes to all of these different SDGs, but in many different countries, in different locations, there are good examples of how some meadows contribute to any one of these different goals. So not only are we thinking about biodiversity, but we're thinking about sustainable development by protecting and restoring seagrass. As we all know, there is an increasing urgency to act for our planetary condition. Not only are there the troubles we face from a pandemic and an economic perspective, but increasingly we're recognizing that we're seeing climate change in front of us, and we're beginning to grasp the true magnitude of the problem of biodiversity loss. And seagrass isn't some silver bullet that protects us from climate change or biodiversity loss, but it's a really important part of a complex jigsaw about planetary recovery. And at Project Seagrass, we believe actually bringing back seagrass and creating that recovery is genuinely possible. We're currently on a path of decline, which is that brown lower line. And we want to, as a planet, create seagrasses that are on a trajectory of net gain. That is where we see the future for seagrasses. And with that, we want to bring life back to our oceans. We want to increase the capacity of seagrass to bring down CO2 concentrations in our atmosphere and produce fisheries that are sustainable, abundant, and productive. So who are we at Project Seagrass? So we are the world's only dedicated, globally facing seagrass conservation charity. There are other conservation charities that dip into seagrass conservation that have intermittent interest in seagrass, but we're the only one that is dedicated to seagrass. And we're not just dedicated to it, but we're actually a group of leading seagrass conservation scientists, and we are amongst and collaborate with the world's best scientists. Many of our team are very well published academically, and with every new conservation measure, we're testing that through the lens of science, not through emotion. And we want to act in a scientific way to lead evidence-based conservation that works. We're also mindful that governments don't have funding, that it's a complicated world to try and restore and conserve our natural environment. So we're very sort of commercially minded. We're trying to link up between the best of government research funding whilst also linking to industry, philanthropy, and bring together opportunities that ultimately try and save the world's seagrass. We're also unique in that we have one of the biggest teams of seagrass scientists in Europe now, and with it we have facilities to undertake seagrass restoration and conservation. We have teams who are able to work in the field, that are able to dive. We have boats we have facilities. We're actually running an incredible seagrass nursery facility in West Wales, at an abandoned old aquaculture facility that we're bringing to life to grow seagrass, and with that we've created a global network of seagrass nurseries trying to foster collaboration and share knowledge. We're also a group of scientists that have huge expertise in this area, and with it, by bringing all those things together, we have an ambitious plan to want to save the world's seagrass. And here is our team. It's headed by our CEO, Dr. Leanne Cullen-Unsworth, who has a background in social ecological systems. And I think that's important to recognise, because at the heart of what we do is not just about thinking about biodiversity and habitats, but it's about seeing that humans are part of that ecosystem, that people are nature. And that's been a principle that we've developed and worked with over a long period of time, in that when we try and run restoration and conservation projects, we work with local people, communities, to make those projects a reality, rather than thinking it as a group of scientists who know better. And I think that's a really important focus of what we do as an organisation. Ultimately, we're trying to do a lot of restoration work, and that's what we're pitching to you here, is that we're working on seagrass restoration, and there are many challenges in that. Our nursery is still at a pilot stage. When we plant seeds, we have poor germination rates. A lot of the technology that we're working with is in its infancy, and the case for restoration is poorly defined. There are many questions at the heart of what we're doing, and to answer those questions, we're trying to develop a program of linked multidisciplinary experts that are helping to solve these real-world applied conservation problems. So a key part of trying to answer those questions is being able to look at specific small processes, and some of that is about looking at the amount of nutrients present in plant material that needs processing in a laboratory. We have projects where we're trying to think about the microbes, the microbiome. Just like we understand that the microbiome is really important in our gut, we increasingly realize that the microbiome is important for germination of plants. We need facilities to be able to analyze samples that can be sent to a sequencing laboratory to understand what microbes are present on seeds. We need to be able to look at some of the microorganisms, the animals. We need to inspect the quality of our seeds, and all of that sort of work needs a functioning laboratory. At the moment, it's really a missing piece in our facilities, and by having a laboratory, we can help supercharge a lot of the work that we're doing. And although we do work with universities who have their own laboratories, we need to be able to do routine analysis to look at the quality, the condition of our seeds, to examine why some plants are doing well and why others are struggling, why sediments that we thought were perfect for seagrass are not actually appropriate. To do that, we need those laboratory facilities. And that's what we're coming to you guys as an ask. That's what we're saying that we need to push forward seagrass conservation and restoration in the UK. And as an organisation, we're not just working in the UK because we believe in ultimately sharing our knowledge. And that's a key principle of what we do as an organization. We work with scientists in the Netherlands, in Denmark, in Australia, and when we develop knowledge, we share that knowledge. And we're about open access, about shared research. And that's not just about sharing our successes, but also ultimately about sharing our failures. And in the field of restoration, whether that's about mangrove restoration or coral restoration or planting of trees, people don't share their failures. We believe that we need to share it all. Having a new laboratory facility would actually help us understand the good and the bad of what we're doing, and I think that's a really important part of who we are. And that's the end of my presentation. And if anyone has any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Does anyone have a question? Paul?
Yes. Yeah, thanks so much, Richard. And actually, a friend of mine is doing a PhD in seagrass research in Australia. So I learned from her how important seagrass is. And now I learned even more from you. So I actually have two questions that came from her. So I'm very curious about that. So she was asking, like, first of all, she said, yeah, it's always really important if we have like seagrass that we also look at the other things in the ecosystem, right? If we just have seagrass by itself, that is good in some places, but in many other places, we need to look at it together with the coral reef and other parts of the biosystem. So she and thereby me are very curious to know like how you intertwine that, say, with other parts of the ecosystem. And second, about scalability. So what do you think about, because there will be so much extra seagrass needed, how will you be feasibly scaling this up to the big levels that are actually necessary?
Two very good questions, and I think they're very answerable. In terms of the larger ecosystem, I think that as an organization, we've always pushed that understanding that the seascape is the important thing, not just seagrass. You need to have the oysters, the salt marsh, the merle beds, the kelp forest all together, and that's critical. And in a tropical sense, it's the coral reefs, it's the mangroves, it's the seagrass. And we're actually involved with projects in the UK where we're trying for the first time to link up some of those different types of restoration. This week, actually, some oysters went back into the Firth of Forth for the first time in over 100 years. And that's part of a project of joined up restoration between seagrass and oyster that we're involved with. It's only very small. It's very early days, but the vision is there that ultimately we need to think about not just restoring one component of the seascape, but all of the components of the seascape. Sorry, what? Could you remind me of your second question?
Yeah, that was about the scalability and how
scalability, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, we have projects ongoing in that area. One of them is about trying to actually collect seed on a large scale. And over the last 3 years, we've been testing the sustainability of effectively using an underwater lawnmower. So that underwater lawnmower will cut the seagrass at about a height of 20 centimeters. And we've been doing that over very small areas in collaboration with the regulators in Wales to test whether actually that has a negative impact. Because basically in an August period, the seeds are floating high in the water column. So if you give the seagrass a haircut, then you can collect all the seeds. And naturally, the seagrass over the winter period would die back to a smaller height anyway. So it's not a huge impact. And people have taken these approaches in other parts of the world, but they've never tested the sustainability of them. They've just built a machine and done it. And obviously that, I think that times have moved on, and you can't just do these things without having basically an impact assessment. And that's what we've been testing over the last few years, is to try and do that. So we hope to be able to mechanistically collect a lot higher level of seeds. Another thing is that we're involved in building different types of machines to try and plant seeds at scale. So we've been working with some collaborators in the Netherlands, actually, a company called the Fieldwork Company, on some trialing some systems that they've built. But we've also we're building a sled that pumps seed into the seabed, and that hopefully is a way of doing a lot of the things that we've been doing by hand over a large scale. So we totally appreciate at the moment that seagrass restoration is it's difficult, it's costly, and to make an impact, it needs to happen at scale. And unless you can use a more mechanistic approach, I don't think you can hit that scale, and that's what we believe you need to do.
Yeah, exactly. So you are saying, okay, so these seeds, that's where you see the future, to do it with a machine, and then using these seeds, because that you can use at bigger scale.
Yes, absolutely. We do some work with transplanting of seagrass, and I think that will always play a role, because I think in some places where the environment is so disturbed from the loss of the seagrass, you might actually have to initiate restoration by bringing plants in to gain stability into that system. But once you gain some stability, then you can actually use seeds. So we believe that, I think it's far more possible to have large-scale restoration if you're working with seeds, even though that plants might be part of that jigsaw. I think that you'll only hit the big numbers if you have seeds.
Yeah, wonderful. Thanks, Richard.
Thank you. Are there any more questions for Richard? I have one more question, Richard. So what's your main challenge for the next period of time?
I think the biggest challenge relates to improving the germination of seeds in the wild. At our nursery facility, we've been able to improve germination to 60, sometimes occasionally 70%. But we can't do that in the wild. And we need to look at how we inject seeds, how we exactly plant them with different sediment types, how the microbes and the nutrients are part of that. And I think that's improving our germination rate is one of the biggest challenges, and that's something that why we need a laboratory facility to be able to do more routine analysis of whether it be the nutrients, the microbes, the condition of the seeds, and I think that's really important. So I can see a question from Rick.
Yes, hi Richard. A quick question on the laboratory. What's that supposed to cost, and how far along with the fundraising are you, and what gap are you facing in making that a reality?
I think it's a long-term vision. Once you have a laboratory, that then we can over time fund more equipment to be in it. And I think that the way we're building it is that sort of concept, in that we want to build we have a warehouse that's basically very open plan. We need to build walls into it and put drainage into it, those sorts of basic functions, and put an exhaust fan, so when we can afford ventilation chamber thing. Basically, we need to sort of set all the infrastructure ready to grow it, and what we're aiming to fundraise here is about £10,000 to be able to put the basics into it. You know, the scales, a more reliable fridge system, you know, different just basic lab equipment in terms of, and that we can process samples in a clean way, a microscope, just very standard things that would facilitate a lot of stuff to be done in a in-house scenario, and I think that's quite important.
Great, thank you, Richard, for answering our questions, and I think it's very clear what the relevance of the work you're doing and what you need funding for. So let's go to our next speaker, and Jess, I would like to give you the floor, and thank you, Richard, for your presentation. You're very welcome to stay, but if you have to go because of your kids, that's of course no problem. So thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Jess, for being so hospitable as well. That's lovely. If you don't mind, I will actually head and take my daughter home. So thank you very much for listening, and I hope you enjoyed Jess's presentation.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Gute Nacht. Is it gute Nacht?
Yes.
Okay, I am attempting to share my presentation, but hold please. Let's see here. Presenting. Let me see what I can do. Oh, not that. One moment. Apologies. Teams doesn't always love me. Let's see here. I'm just going to go to the presentation and play. Can you see my presentation, Kaylee?
No.
Okay, hang on. How about now?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, perfect. So one moment while I determine the best way. There we go. So first I would like to introduce myself. My name is Jessica Cubis, and I am the Senior Manager of Development Partnerships at Clean Air Task Force. I work with our effective altruism partners. I work with some individual donors in the, a lot of times in the arts space, like musicians or actors or artists who are looking to use their work to support Clean Air Task Force. And I also work with the corporate and business partners that come to Clean Air Task Force and want to provide support our work. We're very new to accepting corporate and business dollars, so I spend a lot of my time going through like a vetting process with each one, because it's very important that we ensure that our values are reflected in the business, and that the funding that comes to us isn't going to be detrimental to the planet or to our reputation. And so CATF at a glance, I'm going to give you a brief overview, and then I will jump a little bit deeper. But we were founded in 1996 in Boston with a very narrow mission focused on U.S. coal plants. And then across these last 25 years, we've grown to a global staff of 180, $56 million budget that's 100% funded by philanthropic donations. And then we now have a mission that pretty much encompasses a lot of climate change and technology, and it's to promote practical and durable ways to manage climate change through pragmatic policies, new business strategies, and advanced technologies. And our global staff is primarily in the United States and in Europe. We do have a few folks that work out of Africa, the Middle East, and a couple now in South America. The light blue is where we have active areas this year, and the dark blue is where we have expanded into this year, like doing some pilot projects, doing some scoping work, and where we hope to move into in the coming year. And so before I jump into a little bit more about Clean Air Task Force, I just wanted to set the scene that we're currently facing. The reality is that we are not on track for success on the Paris Climate Agreement goals, and so which are to limit warming to no more than 2 degrees Celsius. So right now, like with this graph, you can see that emissions have continued to rise over the decades, a brief dip during the pandemic when a lot of people were staying home, but then it's right back to increasing. And on top of that, even though renewables like solar, wind, and hydroelectricity are expanding, so is the demand and use of fossil fuels. You know, currently 80% of our energy is coming from fossil fuels. And so along with that, there are also some significant obstacles we're facing as we look at, can we scale up things such as wind and solar energy? For example, land's going to be a significant constraint. Land use challenges, as you can see, there are a number of places that are calling for the limited land that the world has, whether it's for living, you know, affordable living, whether it's agriculture, growing the food that we're going to need, and then all of the different land uses for environmental and climate management in and of themselves. Things like bioenergy, carbon capture and storage, super hot rock geothermal, they are all going to require some form of land use. And so this image right here, which might be a little hard to see, and Kaylee, I'm happy to send the presentation afterwards, so, you know, to get a greater review. But as you can see, like there's a large blue square out in the ocean, and that would be, that's like offshore wind, the red is onshore wind, and the little square is solar. So that is the size of the land that would be needed. And then if you look at what current nuclear would need, it's that tiny green square right in the center. So when we look at different solutions for the climate challenge, we have to take into account, what is the land going to be used for? Is there room for a solar farm, an offshore wind farm, an onshore wind farm, or do we need to look at the technologies that can be smaller but still create the same amount of energy? Another obstacle is that many sectors still lack practical electrical options, and those are things that are require like long distance transportation. So there's marine shipping, aviation, heavy trucking, and then also industry things like concrete, steel, iron making, that we don't yet have a practical electrification option. And that's where we are looking at things like zero carbon fuels, carbon capture and storage, and other solutions where electrification just probably isn't going to be helpful because the batteries are going to be too large or the recharging would take too long. And then the last major obstacle is that 800 million people across the globe still do not have access to energy. Those are primarily in developing countries and regions. And so we need to address that because a lot of current models, so in this little, it's like magenta and purple, that's the models showing that the global south will continue to be in energy poverty. And that's not realistic considering that's where the most population growth is going to happen in the next 50 years. It's also not equitable. We cannot expect developing nations to remain in energy poverty strictly because we want to limit climate change. And so because a lot of what has caused climate change are developed nations' emissions. And so So Clean Air Task Force believes that we're failing because our efforts are too narrow and not sized to the nature and scale of the problem. So the conventional environmental view a lot of the times is that we just need to reduce demand and electrify everything and decarbonize power with 100% renewable. And our view is that the climate challenge is very complicated and uncertain. So if we expect the developing countries to grow, which is likely and equitable, demand is going to increase. It's not going to be reduced. We're looking at having to double the energy system over the next 50 years. As I mentioned, electrification is going to be really difficult in key sectors that have a great deal of emissions. So we need to figure out alternatives to things that can't be easily electrified. And then, as I mentioned, high renewables will be constrained by things like land and materials. A lot of the things that are used to build the solar and wind farms are also now being used in electric vehicles. And we also have to look at things like seasonality. I live in Minnesota, so in the dead center of the US, and we have a very long winter. And so we would not be a prime candidate for solar because it gets dark at 4 o'clock. It's very cold here. And so we have to look at different solutions as well. And then Clean Air Task Force, we see hope, but we think 1.5 degrees is currently out of view. And so we're really looking at a longer game. We know the world does not end in 2050. And so we're looking at what can we scale, what kinds of technologies can be scaled and solutions can be scaled and policies can be put in place so that we're playing a much longer game. Climate change is going to have to be managed well into the future. And so we really take a picture that it's a long game. And so bringing the transition down to earth means, there's a lot of writing on this slide. I'm not going to go into all of it, but that we have to take into account a number of the things I've already said. We need to rely on common sense and iterative learning rather than holding true to things that have likely changed. Renewables are wonderful and great, and they are a part of our portfolio, but we really think that we have to look at all of the possible solutions because we don't want to engage in magical thinking and then have it turn out that things are not going to help. So we really look at what's pragmatic and what's realistic and have the difficult conversations. And so what we need as we move forward is humility and diversity, but also optionality and a long game strategy. Because what we need to do is move this carbon-intensive energy system that includes things like liquid petroleum and electricity over to a decarbonized energy system where we're decarbonizing fossil fuels, replacing some with zero carbon fuels, and using electricity powered by super hot rock, wind and solar, and nuclear power in our end use systems. And so I'm skipping around. Sorry about that. So what does CATF do? I hear this a lot. We do not develop the technologies that I've been talking about, but what we do is we promote the practical and durable ways to manage climate change. And so we do a lot of thought leadership around our broad portfolio of services and expertise. So we do a lot around advocacy and policy making, and that means we both design and develop policies for government leaders and policymakers across the globe. We do a lot of rulemaking and litigation and legal advocacy here in the United States, pushing forth rules and representing nonprofit clients in against decisions that are handed down sometimes by the Supreme Court and sometimes by the EPA. We do a lot of technology and commercial innovation with industry. While we do not take any funding dollars from any company along the energy spectrum, we do work with them in order to do research and development, modeling, analysis on scalability and optimization, and how to get around the market barriers and financing problems that we're currently facing and how we can solve those in the long run. We have a team on CATF staff, as well as we do work with outside partners on modeling and systems analysis. We're really focused on doing realistic modeling. So we do not have models that keep the global south in energy poverty. We really look at the true nature of the problem and what solutions are going to be needed in order to solve transitioning an energy system that's also likely going to have to double in size. And then we do a lot of education and narrative creation. So we do a lot of education with policymakers, government leaders, the general public, donors, as well as we do some with schools as well on a smaller scale. But really, we offer a broad portfolio. So, and we apply all of these things and we use our building blocks, which I've touched on. We do a lot of deep research, a lot of policy and technical assistance to governments, both US and in the EU, and also now on a smaller scale in Africa and the Middle East, commercial assessment, public education, and we also do a lot of coalition building. We really, while we may not always agree with other NGOs or other approaches, we really do look for common ground with industry and NGOs and government, because we realize that all hands are going to need to be on deck to solve and manage the climate condition. And so we believe strongly in optionality. I touched on this a little bit, but optionality to us means that we need to have all the tools in the toolbox. And this grid does not even include everything that we're focused on, but it has the major areas of our work. So we do a lot with methane pollution prevention. We do a lot with carbon capture and storage, specifically in the EU currently, as well as zero carbon fuels. We have a land and climate team that's relatively new, but they're working on the challenges that I mentioned before. And then we have research and energy and systems analysis, and a broad staff of people working on policy in the EU, here in the US, in US states, and then also now working in the countries that we are scoping in. And so we're a little different in that we're a social change organization, and so it's not as easy to share like little bits of impact, or like how $1 equals 1 tree planted. But we are one of the very few organizations that are working on this problem with a very tiny funding share. Only 3% of donor dollars go to environmental organizations, and that does include conservation and across the board. So if we, your $10,000 investment could either go to unrestricted funding, which allows us the flexibility to allocate resources to special projects or new technology that we're scoping, or to move into new regions. We're really looking at moving into Southeast Asia and further into South America, but we would need the support, the funding support, in order to be able to do that beyond where we're currently at. We also can use unrestricted funding to fill the gaps that are not covered by restricted funding. Restricted funding is often what foundations do, and so they will focus their funding on one specific program or one specific region. And we also have a few corporations that are doing that as well, that said, like, we want our money to go towards focusing on the work that the policy work you're doing in Europe. And so we have two types of support that we can accept, and we're open to either. So if the Yugen Foundation wants to restrict your $10,000 to one of our specific programs, we are happy to oblige by that request. But unrestricted funding does allow us to focus on new opportunities and to grow, which is what we're focused on. And then this is just a thing to show, like, in the grand scheme of things, if we're to transition over our energy system from very fossil fuel focused to decarbonized, you can see that the actual funding that's happening in the sphere, this is not for us in Clean Air Task Force, but you can see that actual funding up until now, and then what will be necessary is to do this is like $7 trillion. And so one thing that we're focused on as we move forward is how we can ensure that this funding happens. One of the big successes that we had last year is that we had over $300 billion put into the the Inflation Reduction Act for climate solutions. And we had been working on this since the passage of the Clean Air Act, working with policymakers, talking about the things that are necessary, getting the incentives for business as well as the legislation in place needed to oftentimes encourage energy businesses to change over to zero carbon solutions. And so we see that we have a big challenge ahead of us. And so we're looking at how we can get the necessary funding to go across the spectrum in order to be able to make the transition happen and mitigate climate change. And so that is the end of my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions with the caveat that I am not a scientist. So if you have any question that's dedicated to one of the technologies or, to delve deep into the science and I can't answer it, I'm absolutely happy to connect you with our team of experts before you make your vote or send along any extra information that I might have and can get. So. But I do want to thank you for allowing us this opportunity. I want to thank also Donor Effectif that connected us with Paul, Paul asked Donor Effectif to connect us. And so really happy to be here, really happy that you're taking an interest in Clean Air Task Force, and happy to answer any questions.
Great, thank you so much, Jess, for telling us more about the work that you do. And I think it's very interesting, and we're very privileged, I think, to hear more about your organization. It was really interesting. Are there any questions for Jess? I don't see.
I had a question.
Sure.
Oh, yes.
Now, I was wondering about that graph in one of the first slides about, I think it was the energy level usage per capita. Per region, was it like between North America and Europe?
Let's see.
And I think the energy uses in North America was that much higher than, let's say, Europe, and I thought that's maybe comparable.
Oh yes, hold on. Oh, hold on.
I was wondering where that comes from.
Where it comes from? Sure. Hold on one moment. Let me pull that up. Oh.
Yeah, that one.
This right here?
Yeah.
So this comes from the IPCC sixth assessment report, which was just done in 2022. And so I'm happy to share the full report with you, but and it was an equity assessment looking at global mitigation. And so as we looked back through, you can see, like you shared, you can see that who is using the most energy.
Yeah, and more the explanation indeed. That was what I was wondering about.
Oh, sure. An explanation around
why is it so much higher? I would say North America, I would expect to be more comparable to Europe, for example, but apparently it's much higher in North America.
In North America, yeah. So I would say with North America, I'm again not an expert, but energy consumption across the region. So I think that we have a much greater use of oil and gas, and than Europe. I mean, I know that Europe is also a big user, but I think that given the size of the United States and the focus primarily on oil and gas is my guess. Like oil and gas here in the States, and I don't know what it's like in Europe, but oil and gas here in the States has a heavy hand in lobbying our Congress. And so I think there've been little to up until in the last, like I would say 5 years, there's been little done to stop, the reliance on oil and gas. Some states, like individual states, not the United States, are saying things like, we will not, every car that's purchased going forward after needs to be electric. But California is usually a global leader in, or a leader in the United States in putting forth the in putting forth these things, and then a number of states will follow. But as you likely know, the United States is deeply divided and polarized by their two political parties. And so and both political parties take money from oil and gas. And so I think what I mentioned before around, it's going to take a lot of education with policymakers and government leaders, but it is also going to take putting into place the rules and regulations, like working with the EPA. Last year, the Supreme Court of the United States took a tool out of the EPA is the Environmental Protection Agency here in the States. The Supreme Court ruled and took a tool out of their toolbox, saying they didn't have the jurisdiction to be able to regulate emissions from power plants in the way that they had been. And so we've spent our team, the legal team, has spent a significant amount of time like the whole process is like writing comments and then putting them before this the lower courts and things like that, and showing that even though this was removed, the EPA still has ways of being able to put rules in place that limit power plants. And so just in the last couple of months, the EPA came forward and put in more stringent limits on power plants using the going around what the Supreme Court said and doing it in a different way. So like, and we spent a lot of time like lobbying the EPA to say like, you can still do this, and working with other NGOs as well, who were like, it's not over just because the Supreme Court of the United States said they can't do this. There are other tools in the toolbox. And so, we have a long way to go over here. I think we're on the right track. And I know that Europe also has its own challenges, especially in the wake of, the war with Ukraine and Russia, like cutting off, oil to Europe. And so I think as these global events happen, I think it really is pushing governments and policymakers to see that we can't rely on oil and gas as much anymore. And, I think it's always going to be a part of the picture. And we believe that it's never going to go away fully. And that's why we look at things like carbon capture, that you can retrofit industries to capture the carbon before it even hits the atmosphere. But we did see progress in Europe with policymakers and governments in the wake of what's happening with Russia, because they realized we can't rely on oil and gas. So they did start listening to our policy team and did put things in place and we're still working hard to ensure that they go forward in Parliament. But yes, carbon capture could be helpful. Zero carbon fuels could be helpful. Super hot rock geothermal, where there's super hot water under the heat beneath our feet, is what our scientists call it. But it's abundant across the globe. And so looking at ways that we can further these technologies along, invest in them, scale them, so that the dark blue, especially in the US, can go down. But what we're looking at with the reds and the pinks is that they're going to increase. And so we need to ensure that we're working on the continents with, indigenous people, continents, like working with Africans and doing, yes, sorry.
I'm so sorry, but I have to cut you short for a bit because we're running out of time. But
no problem. Sorry. Very passionate. Thank you so much
for your answer. And I suggest that if we have any more questions for Jess, maybe we can send them by email.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, please.
Oh,
you can reach out to me any point.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Jess, for your wonderful presentation. And you're very welcome to stay for the last presentation of Just Dig It, but also feel free to leave if you have somewhere else to go.
I have a few minutes, so I'd love to hear it. Thank you.
Thank you. So now we're going to Just Dig It. Ronald.
First off mute. Yes, thank you very much, Haley. And Jess, thank you also for your presentation and for all the good work that you are doing. I will share my screen. Let's see. Please give me a heads up. Can you see this?
Yes.
I don't see you. So can anyone say just yes? First step?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Good. Okay, I will start. I will start quickly. So, hello everybody. My name is Ronald. I'm from Just Dig It, and I'm there the head of partnerships and fundraising. And at Just Dig It, we believe that if we can warm up the planet, we can also cool it down. And that's our bold mission statement, and that's where we stand for. I will show you a quick movie about what we do, and then I will go into depth, and I will touch some specifics, and I will go deeper into what we can actually do with a potential donation from you. So here we go.
We don't have any sound, Ronald.
I heard someone. Is the sound not good?
No, there's
we
no
have
sound.
no sound.
No sound.
No. So there is always an option, but I don't know, like you can share sound and images.
I think I did not put it on. That must be the situation. Let me see that again. Yeah, my mistake. There we go, one more time.
Global warming is moving in fast, and we only have this decade to slow it down. Hi. Global warming is moving in fast, and we only have this decade to slow it down. Hi, we are Just Dig It, here to regreen Africa and cool down the planet. By restoring degraded land, we bring back vegetation and have a huge impact on water and food security, biodiversity, livelihoods, and our suffering climate. We've been doing this from the ground up, hand in hand with local communities and partners in Africa for over a decade. Because regreening is done together. In Kenya and Tanzania, together with local communities, we dug hundreds of thousands of water bunds, or, as we like to call them, earth smiles. So rainwater can enter the ground, turning dry land green again. Our grass seed banks are women-led. Maasai women regreen the land, sell the seeds, and create their own social enterprises. Together with Yugen Foundation, we inspire farmers to recover trees with a technique called tree covery, also known as Kasiki Hai. Selected farmers are trained to become champion farmers, so they can go back to their villages and train thousands of other farmers. We then visit these rural communities with a movie roadshow and inspire them through film, music, education, and dance. At the same time, we share our message in all forms using mobile phones, radio shows, murals, billboards, TV ads, and influencers. Over 10 million recovered trees are now alive and kicking in Tanzania, and hundreds of thousands of hectares of land are brought under restoration in East Africa. Spreading the word is the path to better soil fertility, more crop yields, improved lives, and a cooler microclimate. That's why we are scaling up regreening through communication together with partners like Havas. In Africa, we use positive storytelling to empower farmers to regreen their land and improve their lives. In Europe, we touch the hearts and minds of people with engaging campaigns, inviting them to dig in. Meanwhile, we join forces with other organizations in African countries such as Togo, Madagascar, and Ethiopia. The next big thing will be the launch of our mobile app. With this app, farmers are empowered to regreen their land themselves, wherever they are, without the need for on-site organizations or trainers. We are building a regreening movement. together with farmers, NGOs, ambassadors, brands, institutions, and you. This is the decade of doing. So let's do this. Dig in. Cooling down the planet. Just dig it. Global.
Okay. Glad that finally worked out. So that was a quick overview of what we do. But I will go into depth a little bit, obviously, more. I will not get myself off that easy this evening. So, problem that we're all facing, global desertification. So the deserts at all the places where they are expanding. The area that we are focusing on climate change is in sub-Saharan Africa. And well, as most of you I think know André Kuipers, he once said that once he was in space and he looked back on Earth, then he realized we're all on this together. And that's also what we believe in with Dig It. We can cool down the planet, but we have to do it all together. So there is global desertification, there is a lot of drought in a lot of areas, but there is also a lot of opportunity for restoration. And mostly, and a large part of this restoration, we see actually in sub-Saharan Africa. There are large rangelands, large farmlands, that if we can restore them, and if we can break the negative cycle of drought, we can actually restore those lands completely, influence microclimates over there, sequester carbon, and bring back the biodiversity. So what do we do? And how do we do that? So we are what we call a single solution NGO. We do one thing, and we try to do it as good as we can. We have nature-based solutions to actually reverse climate change. And this picture is, in my opinion, always very clear. This is a real picture from one of our projects in Kenya, where one part has vegetation and the other one has not. It's the same moment taken, and the temperature difference is actually 10 degrees. So what we see, what we believe in, is that with some simple and scalable techniques, we can empower the people in sub-Saharan Africa to regreen their lands and actually cool down those places, and with that, the planet. So where is our presence right now? We have our own program, which I will go a little bit deeper in Kenya and Tanzania, but we are also active in other countries where we actually where we are sharing our knowledge of the techniques that we're using and our communication strategies, mostly, as you can see, in Ethiopia, Madagascar, and Togo. And we are actually beginning a new program, regreening program in Senegal. So what do we do? Because it's a bold statement, obviously, that we want to regreen the whole continent of Africa. Well, what we do is we have actually two techniques and three, and one other thing which I will go into deeper, but the most important and probably most famous one is what we call rainwater harvesting. Now, what rainwater harvesting is one of the things that's going on right now in sub-Saharan Africa is that because of the drought, the top layer of the soil of the earth is so hard that when it rains, and it rains there actually more than enough to have a green land. But when it rains, it often rains in one time very hard. And then because the top layer is so hard, there is simply no time for the water to get penetrated into the earth, into the soil. So what we do is we break open the earth's top layer. And then we wait for the rain. We do this twice a year, just prior to the rain season. And then what happens is we dig this semicircular bonds, or as you have seen in the movie, which we call earth smiles. One is these bonds, they are 2.5 meters by 5 meters. So if an elephant can stand in there, they are dig by hands, as you can see, with the shovels, by local communities. And they are able, once it has rained, they are able to harvest per time it rains 2,100 liters of water, and by that regreening 120 square meters of land. These are huge projects that we do, but they are scalable, and they are most importantly working. And as you can see, this is one of the drone footage of our programs right now in Kenya. These are huge plots of land that we are have under restoration right now where we just dig it. So this is we're talking about a little over a month after it has rained. There are sufficient nutrients in the ground. Germination starts, and then the roots of the plants, they actually soften the ground. And once it rains again, the water keeps continue going into the ground. And as we like to say, we have broken that negative cycle over there. So from here on, Earth can restore itself. So it's what is required here, what we do with rainwater harvesting is an intervention. And this footage, the satellite footage of one of our projects in Kenya, where we started digging, as you can see, in a near desert in 2018. And the footage is from 2020, 2 years later. The location has been regreened, it's restoring. And as you can imagine, what happens as well is the restoration of the biodiversity. That is the next, the second order effect. What's happening here? Rainwater is harvested, biodiversity comes back, and we're actually able to influence microclimate as well because there is so these land areas are so large. So far we have dug more than 300,000 of these bonds. So the second thing we do, you saw in the movie, which will what we call farmer managed natural restoration. And what it actually is our mission, and I will go into that later, is to restore in the next decade whole sub-Saharan Africa. That requires from us that we need to reach, empower, and help 350 million farmers or pastoralists. That is an immense amount. That's 20 times the inhabitants of the Netherlands. And as you can imagine, not every technique is suitable for every landscape. The rainwater harvesting is very suitable for what we call rangelands, where there are nomadic people, Maasai people with their livestock. We can use it over there. However, a large part of Africa is actually agricultural land. So what we do there is we help these farmers, we teach them a technique, which as you saw in the movie is called Kasiki Hai, which is Swahili for living tree trunk. And what we do is we teach them how they can restore these trees. So we don't plant trees, but because what's actually happening in these farms, there are a lot of tree trunks in the soil on these farms. However, they all have been cut down. They have been cut down because these farmers have been taught in colonial times that a good land is a clean land. So no trees. So since the root systems are already there, what actually happens is when you treat those trees, when you select them, when you what we call prune them, when you cut some trees down and you give them only 4 or 5 trunks actually to grow, and you protect them, these trees grow back immensely fast because of the climate over there and because of their root systems. So this is actually how we regreen the land in Tanzania. This is our second technique. You see the 4 steps that I was just talking about. We help them select, we prune, we bind them, and then we protect the trees. So right now we have brought back 14 million trees by this technique. What I would also like to mention is once we start a project, once we take a landscape under restoration, we stay committed to these landscapes for 20 years. So every landscape that we are in right now, we have once we started, we only start there if we have the funding in place to stay there for that whole period of time, so that we are sure that actually the regreening takes place and is sustainable over time. So our third method, what we also as well do is we have what we call grass seed banks. And these grass seed banks is what actually happen is they are led by Maasai women. It's an alternative way of their income. And what they do is they sow, harvest, and sell grass seeds that we actually can use in either our projects or that they can sell to other communities over there. And why is this important? Because the grass seeds, it grows there naturally. However, what we often see is that these grasses, there are so many livestock over there that if we don't protect those grass seed banks, you can see here, right is the grass seed bank, left is if we protect these areas, they are able to grow, become healthy, and after that, they can let their stock graze on it again. But again, this is also an intervention technique that is actually also empowering these Maasai communities. So what's our impact so far? Our impact so far is, as you can see, is we have dug over almost 400,000 of hectares restored, more than 300,000 bunds we dug. We saved up, we restored, recovered almost 14 million trees. We have 12 grass seed banks, and we have a lot, as you can see, almost 300 million people right now. The area that we have on the restoration is almost 400,000 hectares, which is close to the southern province of southern Holland. So what we also do is raising awareness with our campaigns. You saw that just in our movie, but I also want to talk a little bit with you about the scalability. So our goal is to reach 350 million people and help regreen the land. That's our sole objective. We know that if we reach that, we have actually a chance of regreening that whole part of sub-Saharan Africa. Now that means that if we are reaching 300,000 people right now, we have to increase our impact by 1,000 in the next, let's say, 7 years. And how are we going to do that? Because we know that our normal way of working is not going to work. It's too intensive actually to do that. So what we do right now is we are scaling up. So we are using mobile technology that we are developing right now, and which we're going to launch in mid-2024, where we are actually making mobile apps gamification available to help these people understand how they need to treat their land, how they need to cut their trees. And we do that also with gamification. You can understand that since Africa is so many countries with so many tribes, with so many languages, with so many different soil types, this is not just a one-size-fits-all solution. So we are currently working to create this for Tanzania, and after that we're going to scale that up to whole sub-Saharan Africa. So this is our moonshot enabler, this app. So what we do is, as I said, I'm head of partnerships and fundraising, and we partner up with a lot. And in this case, with a lot of companies that support us. And in this case, I'm very happy and pleased that I was able to share this with the Yugen Foundation. So what are we able to do with a potential donation of 10,000 euros? So with that, we can become, I can make it very direct. We can dock with that 1,400 of bonds. We can regreen, that will result in 17 hectares of land to be regreened. We know, because of our measurements, how much water that will retain in the next 20 years. We know the amounts of, not exactly the amount of increased biodiversity, but you can understand that the difference, potential difference in biodiversity from a desert compared to a very healthy rangeland. And we also support the livelihoods of the people that are actually living there, that now can actually keep their current nomadic lifestyle, the Maasai people who are actually leading all this project, and they can actually stay there in their own lands instead of they have to go or migrate to the big cities because the land has become unlivable. Then this is the middle picture. That's actually that red circle. That's actually what you see there is a map of Amsterdam with Artes. And then the red circle is about the area of 16 hectares. I just wanted to show you that to give you an idea of what we're talking about here. So what I wanted to close with is the before and after of one of our projects. and the impact that we can see that it has actually on the biodiversity, as you can imagine. So together we believe we can bring back nature, and I really hope that you have questions for me that I can go into a little bit deeper. And if not, then I wish the commission a lot of wisdom to make a good decision with all these three good presentations.
Thank you so much. Again, very interesting, and thank you for making it so visual, and it's very clear what the work of Just Dig It is doing and contributing to nature. Are there any questions? Paul?
Yes, yeah, very interesting, Ronald. So I have two questions. So the first is you show, and that I found very interesting, that you even when you dig these holes, the trees grow even 10 years later, they are still there. I was just wondering if the climate is going to change and it's going to become hotter. Aren't those trees again eventually going to turn into deserts because of climate change? Bit cynical, but that might happen. And the second question is about your mobile app, right? Reaching these 350 million farmers. I've been working with some projects in Africa, and I know that it's extremely hard for these farmers to change the way they do their natural things, right? They are used to doing it in a certain way, and you can come in with something new, but it doesn't mean that they adapt that. So how do you ensure that these farmers are really going to use the app?
Very good questions, Paul. Thank you so much for that. So let me start with the first one. And it's okay to be cynical, because I totally understand the question is how are they. What we see right now is that actually, because the land is actually, we are retaining so much water, we are actually influencing the microclimate over there. So yes, it might become hotter on Earth in general, but because the land is green, it's raining enough. I can honestly don't know what happens if the temperature goes up there, let's say 10 degrees. But what we do know right now is that the temperature in those microclimates are actually decreasing and stabilizing. So I think that would be my answer for right now. We actually see, and that's what I meant with, I would say stopping that downward cycle. It's this intervention that is actually needed, and from there, nature can actually restore itself. So that would be my answer to the first question. The second question, in that case, I quickly will go back to, I will show you quickly in my presentation, and it's obviously a slide that I did not use, but I will, yes. So we do multiple things. Yes, we do multiple things to, it's part of our communication awareness strategy. One of the things that we do is we have what we call these movie roadshows, where we go literally from village to village to show the techniques, to talk with these farmers, to explain to them how this technique is going to improve their lands and livelihoods. So that's one thing. The other thing what we do is, since we work with all these local communities, and we are actually embedded in most of these communities with our staff, what actually happens is, because the impact is so fast and evident, and that's what was also said in that short movie, is that the results speak for themselves. And if your neighbor is having better trees or a greener land next year because he used this technique, you're very much likely to adapt. And that's actually what we are seeing. And the last part of my answer will be, we are actually developing this app with these farmers together. So what I did not share is our team is half based in Europe, half based in Nairobi. So most of the half of our staff is actually developing or working in these programs or developing these apps with these farmers. So right now we had a first trial. Our team was there. We did a pilot with, I think it was like 50 farmers. We got the results back. We are now adjusting it. That's why we haven't launched it yet, because we are really taking into all this user feedback in order to make sure that it's actually usable. Is that a clear answer?
It
for
is.
you?
Thanks, Ronald.
You're welcome.
Are there any more questions? No, then thank you so much, Ronald, for your presentation, for telling us more about Yugen Foundation. Again, I think we are very privileged to hear those wonderful stories about the work that you're all doing. And I think it's going to be a very hard decision to decide which of you will receive the donation. We have until the 1st of October to vote. And of course, we will let you know the outcome of those votes. Maybe if you can send us your slides so we can share them with the Yugen members, and it might be helpful in their decision-making process. So then, and to all of you, thank you for attending, and I wish you all a very nice evening. And thanks again for the wonderful presentations. It was very inspiring.
Thank
Good
you very
night.
much, Kaylee, for having the opportunity. Everyone, good evening.
Good evening.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
Goedenavond allemaal.